Thanks for joining us for New Mexico in Focus. There's been a lot of chatter this week in local media, online, and in the halls of colleges and universities across our state about Governor Martinez's vetoes. Last Friday, the governor line item vetoed all funding for higher education and the legislative branch in the state government. And that's just part of it. The governor in total vetoed more than half the bills passed by the legislature this year. And she reiterated that lawmakers will have to return to Santa Fe for a special session. What do you think about the governor's vetoes? We want to hear from you. Get in touch with us at newmexicoinfocus.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter. Now, our line opinion panelists this week are Sophie Martin. She's an attorney and editor of DukeCityFix.com. Janice Arnold-Jones, former state representative. She's here. Andy Lyman, NM Political Report reporter. He's with us. And Dan McKay, reporter for the Albuquerque Journal. Dan, your first year covering the legislative session for the Journal. I'm glad you survived it. Glad you're here and looking upright. Given the tone and tenor and everything that worked up to the session, during the session, were you surprised by the number of vetoes?
Yes. Being my first legislative session, I see how much work goes into every bill and how many hours they spend taking testimony and talking to experts. Right. The idea that bills would be vetoed even if they hadn't drawn a single dissenting vote in either chamber, that was a surprise to me. But the governor has made it very clear that she has the constitutional authority to do her own review of these bills, and she's not bound by what anyone else decides.
Janice, special session. What do you think?
I think it's going to be miserable. And not fun.
In a word.
In a word.
Right.
And I'm really concerned that the first thing the governor said is that I want a decision before we go into session. For me, that completely cuts out the public. The public is an integral part of this. And but looking at the session, the way I heard it from most of the legislators is there was a viable budget. And many of them thought it was viable to the extent that the governor would veto all of the tax increases and the budget would still stand. But her act of vetoing all of the funding for the legislature, which is kind of goes into the separation of powers, but also all of the funding for the university, is like throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah, interesting. We'll see. We'll talk about what the end game might be on that in a little bit. Andy, the idea of an extraordinary session, legislators taking this thing into their own hands, possibility as the days tick on here?
It's always a possibility. Yeah. I think there's a difference between possibility and probability.
Gotcha.
I think it was a big deal when it happened under Governor Johnson, and I don't see it happening now, given the fact that you couldn't get the whole body to override a veto, and if you're not going to get 2/3 of the body to, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, good point. Sophie, just get your idea on this too. I want to touch on something Dan mentioned. There were a lot of Republican support for a lot of these bills, and sometimes overwhelmingly so, like it not have been a vote of dissension sometimes. Does that not mean anything to a Republican governor? I don't get how that whole process works.
I think what we're seeing here is something that a lot of people sort of focused on during the Trump campaign in the early days of the Trump administration. There's still a certain amount of that going on now, which is the idea that there's more than one audience out there. And so there's certainly an audience that looks at this and says, what in the world just happened? We had bipartisan support. This seems like a no-brainer bill, et cetera, and it still gets vetoed. But there is a different audience that is looking at this and cheering. And so the question that we always have to ask is, well, who's the governor talking to now? And I actually think the other question that we've had since she took office, she seems to be in campaign mode and has seemed that way since she started. And we still don't have an answer, and so it's highly exciting to think about what it might be.
Sure.
What is she campaigning for?
Right.
So who is she talking to? What does she think she's going to get from that conversation? Because it doesn't seem like she is seriously involved in the hard work of governance. It seems instead that she's got her eye on something else. I just couldn't say what it was.
Yeah, that's a good point. You and a lot of other folks. Dan McKay, getting into some specific bills and some specific vetoes. Quite a few caught a lot of folks' eyes. The one that caught me right off the bat was the restrictions of folks who have guns, who have perpetuated domestic violence, and the veto of that bill. Touch on that a bit. What was the idea and the message behind that veto?
The governor did not. She did not criticize the substance of the bill entirely. Her argument centered on the idea that judges already have some flexibility to requires someone to surrender their firearms. And as a former prosecutor, that's something that she's entirely familiar with. And her veto seemed to center more on technical grounds than any argument that she wants domestic violence offenders to have access to their guns.
Sure. But Janice, does that veto miss the point a little bit? Is it about the technicalities of gun ownership, or is it about keeping women safe out there?
I think she really came, I agree with Dan, she came at this as a prosecutor, that the judges already have the authority to do this. And it's interesting to look at things that she signed off on and things that she vetoed. She vetoed the consolidation of elections.
Right.
And the belief that it might somehow impinge on the rights of certain municipalities to request voter ID. But if you read the bill, it didn't say that. There was an exception in there. Then there was another bill. She vetoed the science standards.
That's right.
And I'm grateful for that because it has absolutely no place in statute. It would be horrible to have the Public Education Department go back every several years and update those standards, including every time a new element is discovered. Oh, by the way.
Right.
So there were some very correct things in there. And then there are some things that just blew me away. And I will go back to her verbiage of saying, I'm not going to balance the budget on the backs of New Mexicans, taxpayers in particular,
Right.
But it was okay to balance it on the backs of state employees in two different kinds, and now on the backs of university employees and so which is it? And I'm a Sophie, I don't know.
In a state like New Mexico, when you say I'm not going to balance the budget on the backs of taxpayers, our biggest employers are the university, government, et cetera. I think by definition, this is a bit of flimflammery that should be addressed, needs to be exposed.
Yeah. Andy, another one that was interesting to me on the same theme of Republican support, Nate Gentry sponsored a bill about using medical marijuana for opioid use, and we've talked about it here at this table in this studio about opioid abuse in this state endlessly, but something didn't quite click there. What happened for the governor and her?
She had I think there's a common theme in a lot of the veto messages that either it's already been taken care of, in this case it's not the place of the government to put it in statute, some of these things.
Right.
I think there's a pretty good argument to say some of those things should be in rules, so it's not actually in law. I mean, if you wanted to change it, repeal it, it's there. You'd have to, it would be an act of the legislature to change it. That's kind of the message that I got from her in her veto message from some of those things in there. Either it's already been taken care of, or we need to leave it up to the department.
Can I circle back to Janice for a quick second on that? Could you take a quick 20 seconds and help us understand in statute versus by rule? Do you know what I mean in making it law, and why there's such heartburn about that?
Okay, well, I'm going to say, so in statute means that in order to change it, you must go back to the legislature and change it. That's kind of the bottom line. And I want to go back to what Andy was saying. She also signed a bill by Nate Gentry to codify how rules can be made, because the New Mexico Administrative Code, in my opinion, is a nightmare. And part of it is, they have adopted rules that do function through the agencies like laws, and they're often arbitrary and they're often unseen by the public. So that was a great bill for her to sign. I'm grateful to Nate Gentry for having done that. But that's the difference, and it's kind of like the argument of the Ethics Commission. Should it be in the Constitution? Because if something goes wrong, and we put it in there, undoing a constitutional amendment is very difficult.
Gotcha. Good point. New one, Sophie, solitary confinement for pregnant women and children did not pass. The governor vetoed. That's been a bit of heartburn as well.
There was a tremendous amount of support throughout the state amongst legislators in the legal community. This is really seems to me a social justice issue and an issue involving obviously the support for women from our government. I think this is a situation in which her background as a prosecutor perhaps leads to different, less positive outcomes.
Right.
And she's been beating the tough on crime drum from the get-go. So, why would we be surprised that something that might untoughen even in a humanitarian way?
Dan, another question of her prosecutorial background informing this decision, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think she looks at a lot of these things through the lens of her background in, as a district attorney. She also, a constant theme, she mentioned in vetoes was the possibility of unintended consequences. So she often acknowledged that yes, there's some merit to this particular idea, perhaps new limits on solitary confinement, but I don't think this particular language is the right way to go. She mentioned that repeatedly in veto messages.
I'm wondering, though, if her service as a prosecutor is actually a disservice as governor. And I say that because as a prosecutor, I understand that when you're negotiating with a prospective defendant, there are only a few options. When you're trying to negotiate from that perspective in the legislature who has infinite options, I'm not sure you can win that one.
That's an interesting point. Good. I'm glad you made that. Andy, we've got under a minute here. One that's kind of roiled the African American community was an anti-discrimination bill that the governor vetoed as well. Touch on that one, if you would.
I'm not. I'm not familiar with as much.
Fair
as
enough.
she did there.
Yeah, fair enough. There's 70 some odd bills she
Yeah,
vetoed. Don't worry about it. So we can pick up on that one. There was the basics of it. The governor says, look, I don't think this is going to help solve anything, having something like this on the books. And that's not so great for African Americans to hear. They're saying, well, we'll just let the nature figure it out.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, I think that is, I think that is consistent with a more recent Republican strategy in dealing with certain issues, like let's just leave it alone, let's not. But we're in a situation in Albuquerque in which the African American community and several communities of color are struggling with concerns about how government interacts with the community.
That's right.
And even if this isn't perhaps we're letting the perfect get in the way of the helpful, something that could help to change the conversation and perhaps signal a governor who is willing to tackle harder issues. Ones that she may not be as comfortable with and that her party may not be as
Yeah,
comfortable
there you go. Listen, I got to tell you, when you're 3% of the population, these things mean something. When these kind of vetoes mean something. We'll have to end it there. Now, when we come back to the line, we'll discuss a new ban on so-called lunch shaming practices at schools across New Mexico.